The House Education Committee will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Colazar.
Here.
Representatives Churches.
Present.
Shannon.
Present.
Weiss.
Here.
Glanville.
Present.
Conlon.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
Wagella.
Here.
Song.
Present.
Green.
Here.
Markkinen.
Here.
Paquette. Wenzel.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 13 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Glanville moves to approve the minutes of the September 25th meeting without objection, so ordered. Okay, today we will start by taking up House Bill 4027, which was introduced by Representative Zorn, which establishes the Purple Star Schools program here in Michigan. We took testimony on the bill back in June. First, we do have an H2 substitute, which will change the implementation date to 2026. Representative Conlon makes the motion to adopt that substitute. Will the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion of adopting the substitute, Chair Colazar.
Yes.
Representatives Churches.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Weiss.
Yes.
Glanville.
Yes.
Conlon.
Yes.
Edwards.
Yes.
Wagella.
Yes.
Song.
Yes.
Green.
Yes.
Markkinen.
Yes.
Paquette. Wenzel.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 13 yeas, 0 nays, 0 pass. The H2 substitute is adopted.
Thank you. And with the H2 adopted, Vice Chair Green makes a motion to report the bill with recommendation. Will the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion to report, Chair Colazar.
Yes.
Representatives Churches.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Weiss.
Yes.
Glanville.
Yes.
Conlon.
Yes.
Edwards.
Yes.
Wagella.
Yes.
Song. Green.
Yes.
Markkinen.
Yes.
Paquette. Wenzel.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 13 yeas, 0 nays, 0 pass. HB 4027 is reported as substituted.
Thank you. And next, we will be taking testimony on House Bill 5735 from Representative Glanville regarding the Michigan Merit Curriculum. So Representative Glanville, if you want to head over to the hot seat, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Education Committee. Thank you so much for taking up my bill, HB 5735. And this bill seeks to clarify language in the Michigan Merit Curriculum, better known as the MMC. The MMC is the guiding document for high school graduation requirements in the state of Michigan. And any changes made to this document are taken very seriously by all of our stakeholders: students, parents, school boards, teachers, administrators, the MDE, colleges and universities, even employers have a vested interest in ensuring that our students graduate high school with the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, otherwise known as KSAOs if you come from that world, needed to be successful going forward, right? So with that in mind, let me assure you, this bill does not seek to make any substantive changes to the MMC. No knowledge or skill or ability or other characteristic that is expected of students and embedded in the curriculum is being changed. Right? So the purpose of this bill is to add clarity in the wording of the MMC. As it stands today, the language in the MMC includes examples of course names, such as Algebra 1 or Algebra 2. And these course names are meant to be examples, when in fact the MMC is built on standards, not courses. So the model on which schools were created and have largely operated for the last 100 years is 100 years old. And it was a model that was designed to prepare students for primarily a manufacturing workforce. That is why students sit in rows and they have a manager, otherwise known as the teacher, right? They took 15-minute breaks in recess and lunch. And schoolwork was, by and large, task-oriented with assignments that had goals that could be easily checked off a list, including things like precision and completion rates. So if you think about piecework, again, like in a factory setting 100 years ago, you got paid, by how much you could complete with precision in a certain amount of time. So very similar to what we think about in schools. So fast forward 100 years, and while basic knowledge has not changed much. I mean, math is math, reading is reading. However, the expectations and how we use that knowledge, along with related skills, abilities, and other characteristics, has shifted significantly. As we think now more, we expect our students to be thinking critically, to ask questions that go beyond the factual, to include interpretive and evaluative reasoning, problem solving. They need to be able to iterate, explain, reason, communicate, synthesize, and analyze. So we often talk about real world or authentic experiences in the classroom. And unfortunately, because of the course names that I mentioned earlier, we get caught up in the course name, not the standard on which the course is based. So standards are those pieces that are set in place. So for example, that a student has mastered their times tables. That would be a standard, the times tables of 7. Or something along those lines, right? So we're still expecting that standard. What we're saying here, though, for an example of how standards work, is that you might have a science course that incorporates math, science, and technical writing skills, which would be English, right? And if the course satisfies the standard for learning a particular math skill, a particular science skill, and a particular English skill, it shouldn't matter what course it is, but they should be getting credit for those standards. And that is indeed the intent of the Michigan Merit Curriculum. We inserted those course names because if you are not a professional educator, that might be a little bit confusing to you. So it makes it a little bit easier to say, so example, we group all these math standards together and we call it Algebra 1. We are not changing the standards. We are taking out those course names so that you could have an Algebra 1 standard in an integrated course. This would create flexibility in the curriculum, allowing schools to develop those cross-curricular courses that many do, and provide credit for students to still reach the Michigan Merit Curriculum without losing any of the actual requirements of the curriculum. This bill was brought to me after a conversation I had with MDE, where we were talking about this exact topic. And when I mentioned it to other stakeholders, teachers and superintendents, by and large, the response I got back was, why can't we do this yesterday? They are eager for this change so that they can better communicate what we're actually doing in schools. And with that, I believe I will take questions or pass it to Dr. Kennedy? Sure, I'll take a couple questions.
Actually, I have a question. So
Yeah.
give me a visualization of what this would look like. For example, if I'm a 8th grader about to go into high school, and the normal traditional track might be, well, English 9, 10, 11, 12, and then world history, U.S. history, civics, econ. How might that look a little bit different if this bill were adopted, or would it look different?
It might. And again, we're not getting rid of courses, right? But what this allows is for schools to create. So we often hear about block scheduling, where you have a course that's 2 hours long or something, right? Or an hour and a half once a week. And so this allows for a more flexible space so that a student, when we have seat time and when we have classes, sorry, let me get back to your question. So they might still take English 9. But there might also be a course that's offered that's like an English science course, where they are doing writing and research, and they learn to do citations. And so like an English and science teacher might work together on a course like that, or even just a unit that provides the standards for both of those, whereby the student would be completing each of those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or maybe a historical fiction course or
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I mean, teachers do this kind of work a lot. It's actually quite frequent, and we see it in spaces where we have a little bit. Some schools have done some more innovative scheduling techniques, and you see this a little bit more in those spaces. So, but it really helps provide those like real world experiences where English is not separate from science. It is not separate from math. I mean, we have word problems. You need to be able to read and understand, and really comprehend how language is being used in a math class. So where are we giving credit where it is earned?
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few questions. One is, are you saying that our curriculum that the schools are picking are not meeting our state standards?
No,
Okay.
the curriculum is fine.
Well, because I guess I think about math and how foundationally Algebra 1 and the geometry courses are really important for then exploring further math
Sure.
courses. But if you don't have that foundation and if it's not clearly identified, then it can be disjointed, would be a concern of mine.
So I'll take your example of geometry, right? What if we have a student who's in a CTE course and they're learning CAD design and they're working with 3D modeling on a computer? They are clearly learning, mastering, understanding geometry. I would argue maybe even in a more sophisticated sense than a student who's sitting looking at a textbook talking about Pythagorean theorem and just being able to memorize what that is, right? So it's in the application. And so now you have a student who's potentially in a course where they're getting all of the geometry knowledge, but they're also getting the added benefits of how that's being applied. So it's actually a more advanced, we call it higher order thinking skills. And that's what we strive to get students to, is using those higher order thinking skills of analyze, synthesize, that sort of thing, instead of just repeating back facts. For a lot of students, and I think for all of us this is true, it is more difficult to memorize than it is to apply. And you have to know the knowledge first, like you have to have that like memory first. But then the next step is to be able to apply it to whatever situation arises. And that's where in a class that is only teaching math, it is a struggle to then get us to that higher order thinking skill.
And I understand what you're saying, but and we're of a different generation, like for using the example, you and I are in the same generation than kids today, and they don't, hold on, you and I are in a generation where we understand the evolution of network administration and computers and how computers work. Kids now don't have that foundational understanding. I guess my concern would be is, yes, I agree with what you're saying about the higher order of thinking and getting into the CAD, but if they don't have that foundation of understanding where it came from,
Well, with all due respect, you can't, unless you understand the basics, you cannot graduate to those higher order elements. If you don't know that 2 + 2 is 4, you can't do multiplication. You can't then apply that to algebra. You can't then apply that to, right? So it's not that they're not learning the basics. It's that they are learning everything in contextual setting and having a deeper understanding of it.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Weiss.
Thank you. And I have 2 questions, if that's all right. First, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the bill. So I had one concern about a section in the bill. It says at least 3 credits in mathematics, and then the language that was added, including 3 credits that are aligned with subject area content expectations developed by the department and approved by the state board under section 127.8B. That language, including 3 credits, does that mean that 1 credit does not have to be aligned to subject area content expectations?
I'm going to let Dr. Kennedy answer that question.
All right.
If you don't mind.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And then I also just wanted to have a little bit more of a conversation around the social studies requirements. I was a social studies teacher, so this is very close to my heart. I know that the way that the bill is structured, it still requires civics, which I think is very important, but it removes requirements for U.S. history, world history, and geography, that those specific courses be taught. Can you just talk a little bit more about the intent there?
Yeah, it's not removing anything per se. It's removing the names of courses. So if I go to a high school that calls, sorry, give me that course name again. World Geography, was it?
World history.
World history. Okay. So if I go to a high school that calls a course World History, I get credit for World History. If I go to a high school that calls it Global History, I'm no longer taking World History, but I'm satisfying the exact same standards. So the what we're trying to do is remove just the course name, so people don't get tied to the name, but they're actually looking at the standards and what students are learning. So it doesn't matter if you call it world history or global history, as long as they are learning those same standards, which is what the Michigan Merit Curriculum is actually built on. That's the goal. And the course names, like I said, were put in there because for folks who don't quite grasp all this standard and maybe aren't educators, it was a little confusing. So it was easier to say, for example, these things, and then everybody just grabbed onto those course names without really.
That makes sense. I just wanted to clarify because I also taught elective social studies courses, like I taught Detroit history, and would that like technically qualify as U.S. history when like we're not necessarily covering
as long as you meet the standards that are expected for the student at any grade level. And that's another thing. You could mix the standards up, right? You could maybe take your Detroit history and get some of the U.S. history standards in one class, and then satisfy them in another way. So
Okay. I guess then my follow-up question on that would be then how would that be, and maybe this is a question for the department, but in that case, like how would that be tracked? If you're getting like if you're taking like, as an example, Detroit history class and then another, like how would you track which
that would
standards
be,
were met?
many schools are already doing this kind of work. It would be, the school would be setting that up through their SIS or their registrar or through a personal curriculum. Again, this does not change, and you don't have to do this. Like if you want to teach, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, etc., that's fine too. This is just, like I said, giving recognition to courses that maybe don't carry the same course name or that are introducing elements from other places, and it opens up the door for schools to be thinking a little bit more creatively when we think about the constraints of seat time and things like that. How can we get learning in a more integrated way?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is it fair to ask that, we often hear from pretty much everybody that we want to give students and schools more flexibility. If I ask, is that the goal of this bill? Is that the goal of this bill?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, and to be fair, I know you all have something in front of you from Launch Michigan and Vanessa Kiesler, and I would agree with her. I mean, this is only, like, there are other things we should be considering updating in the Michigan Merit Curriculum, but I felt that this was really like the lowest hanging fruit because there are no again, we're not changing any knowledge requirement. We are simply removing example course names so that people can start thinking in a more flexible way. And if schools want to then create courses that are more flexible, it will make sense to everybody.
Thank you. Representative Wagella.
Hi, thanks for bringing this forward. I think this is actually really an interesting way to move forward because, I think as educators we know that what we're expected to teach is not the course title, right? It's the standards that are set forth by the state. So just to kind of paraphrase, as a social studies teacher, what this would leave room for, in my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, students are still going to learn the exact same thing that they would learn currently, but you could do it in a you could still even now do it in a different way, but it would allow you to have different courses like maybe history through, elections or activism and movement building, and then global conflict. And those be potentially the 3 courses you take in high school, which then have a mixture of the U.S. history standards, the world history standards, et cetera, if you can design a curriculum in a way that still hits all of the standards, but maybe does so in a more logical way rather than just going compartmentalizing all of the subjects because they have similar things. I guess my point is, and that was just, off the top of the head, I'm sure curriculum experts will come up with something better, but it gives schools the flexibility to get creative with how students are learning that can maybe draw them in a little bit more than just U.S. history or world history.
Right. Well, and not only that, but as I mentioned before, the opportunity to have then cross-curricular partnerships. And I've taught in schools, that do that. They had a little bit more flexibility in what they were able to do because they were in a different setting. And the benefit of it is fantastic. I mean, teachers are collaborating with other teachers outside of their own curriculum area. They are coming up, so they're doing a lot of that shared work that just elevates everything for the experience across the board. So.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
All right.
testimony. And with that, Dr. Cheryl Kennedy is testifying, I believe, in support of the bill.
Thank you, Chair Colazar and members of the committee. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 5735. I'd also like to thank the sponsor, Rep. Granville, for introducing this bill. I'll provide a brief overview of why Michigan Department of Education proposed this language to Rep. Granville, and then we'll be happy to answer questions that you may have. House Bill 5735, in practice, is not transformative. It's simply meant to clean up current language, make it easier for the typical person or school administrator to understand, and similarly make it easier for our legislators to understand when they're considering legislation that touches the Michigan Merit Curriculum, more commonly known as the MMC. Foundationally, it's important to note that the MMC is based on standards, not specific courses or curriculum. For example, as shared before, math standards could be taught in a geometry course, but they could also be taught in an electrician's course. Curriculum is the vehicle used to teach the standards required in the MMC and is determined by local districts and their school boards, not the state, which is responsible only for setting the standards. I will walk you through the changes we're seeking and the rationale behind those changes. In section 1, lowercase I, math. This refers to specific math courses like algebra, geometry, and algebra 2, rather than standards typically found in algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. We are seeking a language change to align the language to the same standards format as the English language arts portion of the MMC. In the English language arts section, courses are not listed, but rather credits in English language arts are aligned with subject area content expectations or standards. The change of the language in the bill would do the same for math. It also removes language calling out CTE courses because CTE courses, or any courses that teach math standards, would count toward math graduation requirements of the MMC, even as it is currently written. Finally, language speaking to the SAT and Algebra 2 benchmarks would be removed because the SAT does not currently identify benchmarks as Algebra 2. They speak to the standards. Social science and science is the same. The same is true of these sections that speak to the social science and science standards. Currently, specific courses in both social science and the sciences are entered into law. We're seeking to align the language like that of English language arts so the law speaks to required standards other than specific courses. Hopefully in front of you, I shared with the clerk earlier, so hopefully you have it. I provided an MDE published document that reviews some myths and facts about the MMC. In this document, it does kind of talk about the difference between standards and courses. I am now happy to answer any questions you may have regarding House Bill 5735 and its relationship to the Michigan Merit Curriculum.
Thank you. Representative Weiss, did you want to ask your question again?
Yeah, just to follow up on the one piece of language in the legislation around the math requirement, the addition of the including 3 credits. Does that mean that 1 credit does not have to meet standards the way it's written?
So that gives a little bit more flexibility. As you know, currently we have math standards that are typically grouped as Algebra 1, math standards that are typically grouped as geometry, math standards that are typically grouped as Algebra 2. And the way the MMC is written is that all students must have those standards up to that ability. That 4th year, if you remember when we were talking about financial literacy, and we suggested that financial literacy could count as a math standard, right? There are other some computer science courses could count as that 4th year math standard. So that provides a little bit more flexibility in that 4th year for other math courses that aren't necessarily grouped in that Algebra 1, Algebra 2 geometry type format.
Thank you. So it's meant to be as a way to make sure that computer science or financial literacy would still count.
And it's that way today. So I just want to be really clear. This bill changes absolutely nothing in how courses are determined today. We have some really creative districts that are using the full flexibility of the MMC now. The reason why we're seeking the removal of course names is because, as you know, when you put those course names in front of people, they think, oh, I have to do this. When the reality is, nope, you don't. And Rep. Glanville and we got into this conversation when we were talking about those computer science standards, and explaining why you can have a computer science course and it can count as a math standard, right? Or a CTE standard or other standards. That provides much more flexibility for the individual student, possibly who maybe is on a very personal track that involves a lot of CTE or technology, and they want to create a curriculum, a personal curriculum that meets the standards for graduation. We have that flexibility right today, but sometimes people get caught up in those names, those course names, and they're like, oh no, you don't have room for that because you've got to take Algebra 2. We run into this also with the, when we're talking about not AP, but IB courses. A lot of times kids who want to be in an IB program, but they're in a mixed high school setting, they'll say, well, I have to take Algebra 2 and my IB math. I'm like, nope, you don't. You only have to be able to demonstrate that you've met those standards. And you can do that in your IB courses.
Thank you. Vice Chair Green.
Yeah, I have a question just since I have you here, and it's not necessarily a change about the 15 schools that were in this part of the legislation, in the statute. Did that ever come to fruition, the specialty schools that it designated in here?
You mean the original MMC?
Yes.
You know,
Because it designated for 15 specialty schools, but I don't know what they are.
yeah, and I don't think it ever did come to fruition. I think it created that flexibility for a school to seek out that specialty school designation. But I don't believe that currently in the state of Michigan we have any specialty schools.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very
All
much.
right, thank you.
Okay, I have some cards to read in. My apologies. I forgot to mention House Bill 4027's cards, so I just want to go through them really quick. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Shane Preston from the U.S. Department of Defense. Again, not wishing to speak, supporting the bill. Dr. Kennedy, you didn't put a position here. I'm assuming support. House Bill 4027, not wishing to speak, supporting the bill. Dr. Cheryl Kennedy. Moving on to House Bill 5735, not wishing to speak, supporting the bill. Matt Schuler from the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. Not wishing to speak, neutral on the bill. Vanessa Kiesler, Launch Michigan. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill. Jeff Cobb from Ed Trust Midwest. And with that, Vice Chair Green moves to excuse absent members without objection, so ordered. And there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.